If we can distinguish between right and wrong, then that gives us some direction in life. It should make us aim a certain way, right? Now, for some reason why we humans tend to go the wrong way. I think it has to do with original sin. I think that we have some evil inclination within us that causes us to desire or to want the wrong, to disagree or dislike God. But there is something in us also that makes us clearly recognize the difference between right and wrong, and it gives us a sense of direction. It gives us a sense of purpose, a way to aim ourselves. And we aim our children that way, and we try to build our communities that way. We try to build our business that way. How long would a business stay in business if all of their clients they stole from? They wouldn't stay in business long. Everybody knows that it's much better to do things the right way. Justice. Now, that God expects us to serve the interests of justice, that God is expecting you to be a certain way. Let's see if that's true. In fact, before I go to that, I don't have enough time. God does expect us to do that. Oh, let's see, where did I do it? Look at Proverbs chapter 11, verse 1. This is an interesting... Yes, that God expects us to serve the interest of justice. I said verse 1 of 11. How does God say this? A false balance is abomination to the Lord, but a just weight is his delight. Remember, he delights in justice. Now he says a false balance is an abomination to the Lord. What's a false balance? It's like you're at the market, and they would have a balance there, and they would have a weight. And this weight is supposedly 1 pound. They used other stuff, but they should have used pounds. It's a lot easier for me. The pound there, and then so they weigh out the wheat or the corn or the grain or something else on this other side of the balance, and when it balances out, they say, there you are, there's your pound of corn, whatever. But if you have a weight there that's not quite a pound, what happens? You're giving them less wheat. And what God says is a false weight is an abomination to God. Well, that makes sense, right? It's an abomination to you too, especially if they're taking your money, if they're cheating you. Look how many times this is mentioned right there in Proverbs. Look at chapter 16, verse 11. It's real simple that he just mentions it over and over and over again. And I'm not even touching a minor fraction of how many times this is mentioned. A just weight and balance are the Lord's. All the weights of the bag are his work. In other words, if you get it exactly right, not too heavy, not too light, you get it exactly right, God says, that's my work. You see, God is zealous. God is zealous about justice. And that's why you ought to be a little more zealous about, the time you take in work. You ought to be a little more zealous about how you sell your used vehicles. Right? Yeah. You ought to be a little more zealous about paying your bills on time. Didn't even get one amen out of that one. Anyway. So we're not terribly zealous about, they say, let's not get overworked. Don't be over much righteous. Don't be over much righteous. Wag your finger at us. Come on. But God says, that's mine. That's mine. I love that. That's what I love. Somebody went to a lot of trouble to get that weight exactly right and won't let anybody mess with it. Oh, boy, I like that one. Look at chapter 20, verse 10. That's in Proverbs, chapter 20, verse 10. Divers weights, that's diverse, that means different. Divers weights and divers measures, both of them are alike abomination to the Lord. Now, what is he saying here? Different. Different. You got 2 different weights in your bag. What are you doing with 2 different weights? You say, well, I only use the good one. What are you doing with the one that's not right? What are you doing with counterfeit bills? What are you doing with that? You shouldn't be having that. Look at same chapter, look at verse 23. Divers weights are an abomination unto the Lord, and a false balance is not good. Wow. Look at Leviticus chapter 19, verse 35. There are a number of really good verses in Leviticus, right, Danny? Really good verses in Leviticus. In fact, the most quoted verse in the New Testament comes out of Leviticus. Thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself, in case you were wondering. Anyway, look at Leviticus, I said chapter 19 and verse 35. Ye shall do no unrighteousness in judgment, in meat yard, that's measurement, in weight, or in measure. Actually now, since it says measure there, I don't know what meat yard is. I have to look that one up. Just balances, just weights, a just ephah, that's a volume measurement, and a just hin, I think that's a liquid measurement, shall ye have. I am the Lord your God, which brought you out of the land of Egypt. You're going to do it my way. We're going to have everything exactly perfect and right. No skimping, no shaving, no sliding, no slippery, no nothing. Everything absolutely perfectly right. Exactly the truth. Exactly the weight. How is it about this? This is God. He's saying, I'm extremely zealous about this. I want it done. Look at Deuteronomy chapter 25 and verse 13. God is a God of justice. Don't forget it. This is not his greatest attribute. Mercy rejoices against judgment. We get it. We understand it. But let's lay the foundation. God is a God of justice. Deuteronomy 25, I said verse 13. Thou shalt not have in thy bag divers weights, a great and a small. You see? In the same bag, you got two different weights. One's bigger, one's smaller. He said, you better not have that. Thou shalt not have in thine house divers measures, a great and a small. Not even in your house. Not even as an adornment on your wall. Nope. Do not have it. All right. There's plenty more to deal with that on. This is just my point that I'm trying to make here is that God expects us to serve the interests of justice. This is something that he's looking at us at and saying, I want you to be like this, because if you're not like this, it displeases me. And he's extremely zealous about this. So he expects us to serve the sense of justice, the interest of justice. Now, he also goes to a lot of trouble to set us up in implementing institutional justice. Remember over there in Genesis chapter 9, after the flood was over and they all come out of the ark? They all come out of the ark and they're standing on dry land, and God says, I'm going to change some things. Because before the flood, there was no institutional justice. There was no authority for anybody to apply rules of justice. And so that's why the earth was filled with violence. Nobody was getting in trouble for the bad things that they did. Everybody was just doing whatever was right in their own eyes. That's why road rage happens, by the way. Road rage happens because nobody's getting caught. They're doing horrible things and nobody gets caught. And after 3 or 4 people do you wrong on the road and you have a tendency to be enraged, well then that last person that did you wrong on the road is going to get it. That's what happens. They'll chase them down and they'll shoot them. It's because no justice. They're getting away with it. And you know how that feels. That's horrible. You hate it. It's something inside you. You hate it. Well, God said after the flood, he said, we're going to change some things. And he says, now, anybody who slays somebody else, by man shall his blood be spilt. God delegated the authority to people to institute justice among themselves. That's a huge step that God made right there. It's a step that actually is the foundation for all of our justice systems, all of our government. We can base all government on that statement by God. I've changed some things. Now you're responsible to impose or to institutionalize justice. I got a few minutes. I'm just going to give you an idea about this. What is the purpose of a justice system? This is just from our studies in the justice system. I didn't study law, but I have to learn some things about law because if I don't understand it, I can't interpret it. So I'm forced to study up on some things. And what I've noticed is that we get a little bit confused about what the justice system is about. The purpose of our justice system is this, supposedly. It's punitive, Even though nowadays with juveniles, they don't think of it as punitive. They don't want to punish the juveniles. They have other reasons. Okay, it's punitive means retributive, retaliatory, or vindictive. That's where vengeance comes in. Somebody needs to pay. Somebody, you hurt me, you ought to be hurt. That seems right. You ought to be punished. It's protective. That is, it's supposed to incapacitate or limit the power to reoffend. So it is protective. It's trying to keep somebody from doing the same thing again. And that's where you get over there in the Sharia law, where if somebody steals, they cut off their hand, right? Well, there you go. That'll take care of that. It's deterrent. Cutting off the hand is not a deterrence. Well, it may be, actually. But cutting the hand off is actually incapacitating the person to commit the crime again. Here in the West, we just put them in prison, which, some people say that cutting off the hand is cruel. You could also say putting somebody in prison is kind of cruel. So anyway, it's also a deterrent. The punishment, the justice system is not just punitive and protective, it's also trying to diminish the willingness to reoffend, make people afraid to do it. And that's why they're very careful to put harsher and harsher punishments on harsher and harsher crimes, so that it could be a deterrent. And that is why you'll have the argument that, you need to have something really, in fact, every single voting cycle, every single election cycle, you'll have somebody on there saying, we need to be harder on criminals. Somebody asked me, what do we do to stop these kids from tagging? I said, shoot them. Somebody says, amen. Amen, shoot them. No. We got to be careful now. No, but that's about the only way to stop them. But if you increase the punishment, and they have done it, by the way, folks, they have made tagging, if it costs a certain amount of money, a felony. A felony. It's a felony right here in this state, in this county. It's a felony to tag if it does a certain amount of damage. And boy, there's just no way in the world to equate tagging, which is pretty bad. I agree, it's rotten, but it's not the same thing as shooting up a house or something like that, right? It doesn't seem to me. Anyway, the fourth is not just deterrence, it's also rehabilitative, or the Bible might call it redemptive. It's the idea of improving the character of somebody. It's giving offenders the opportunity to resolve their guilt, to get back into society and be clean, have it paid off. It's the idea of rehabilitative, give somebody another chance. And by the way, parents, when you're spanking your kids, make sure they have a way of having it done and over with. Finished. It's done. You're not going to hold that against them anymore. Why? They paid for it. Get it behind them. That's the idea of rehabilitative. Restitutive. I'm not sure I'm pronouncing that right. Reparative, compensative, restorative. In other words, if somebody got stolen from, they ought to get that money back. And they get it all the time. We have the idea of restitution so much. I had this one kid, they started a fire in a house that had just been built, started a fire, burned the house down. They hadn't put insurance on it. The entire loss, over $300,000. His restitution was, joint and several with a couple of other kids, $300,000. When's he ever going to pay that back? Still, we all agree in the sense of justice, he ought to be paid back. And even if he had insurance, the insurance company ought to be paid back, seems to me. All right, restitutive. If they don't get paid back, then it's not really justice. Come on, you know it. And the sixth is denunciative, instructive to others. Abstract justice is worthy in itself. And I consider this really to be just the fear of God. Justice itself deserves to be observed, even if there's no other benefit involved. Somebody it ought to be proclaimed clearly. For example, it ought to be illegal to have an abortion for your convenience. It ought to be illegal. Somebody says, yeah, but even if we make it illegal, they'll still do it. It still ought to be illegal. Why? For the denunciative reason, so that it can be said clearly, this is wrong. I've run out of time. We'll start up next week or sometime.
is your theme for this month? Justice? That's what your theme is going to be? Okay. I had a solution for the graffiti.
You got
No,
one.
I did. Give me 30 cans, make it explosive. Yeah, that's my solution. That's just my solution. Okay, I know they think I'm mad, but in the real world, in the perfect world, that's okay.
That's why we're not voting for you.